July 24, 1943. 11:47 p.m. over Hamburg, Germany. Flight Lieutenant David Walsh watched his altimeter climb through 18 EUR feet in the cramped nose of his Lancaster bomber. Through the perspex, he could see 790 other heavy bombers converging on the same point, a river of metal and fuel stretching back 40 miles. The Würzburg radar stations below were already tracking them. In 12 minutes, the German night fighters would arrive. Walsh had survived 11 missions. Statistically, he wouldn't survive a 12th. Then, something impossible happened. The radar went blind. Before we continue with David Walsh's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Hamburg, July 24, 1943, where David Walsh was about to witness something that would change the air war forever. 6 months earlier, in a Nissen hut kitchen at RAF Marham in Norfolk, Corporal Gerald Jerry Stevenson was peeling potatoes. He was 23 years old, 5'7", from a coal mining family in Durham. Jerry had failed the physical for aircrew, flat feet and poor eyesight, so they made him a cook. Every morning at 4 a.m., he prepared breakfast for men who might not come back. Every night, he counted the empty chairs. Jerry had one peculiar habit. He listened to the wireless while he cooked, an old civilian receiver he'd brought from home, and he noticed something strange. Whenever he wrapped leftover food in the kitchen's aluminum foil, the stuff they used to keep things fresh, the radio would crackle with interference. Sharp, persistent static. Move the foil closer. The static got worse. Move it away, the radio cleared. It was January 15, 1943, when everything changed. Between June 1942 and January 1943, RAF Bomber Command lost 47 heavy bombers over Germany. Shot down by night fighters guided by radar, the Germans had developed a system called Himmelbett, 4-poster bed, a network of Würzburg radar stations that could track individual bombers and direct fighters to them with deadly precision. The numbers were brutal. On the raid against Nuremberg on August 28, 1942, the RAF lost 23 bombers out of 159, a 14.5% loss rate. On Essen, March 5, 1943, they lost 27 out of 442. The crews called it running the gauntlet. Flying Officer Martin Hughes was the first friend Jerry lost. Martin was 21, from Manchester, a wireless operator who used to joke about opening a radio repair shop after the war. "Hughes and Stevenson Electronics," he'd say, shaking Jerry's hand. 50-50, mate. We'll fix every wireless in England. Martin died on the night of January 15, 1943, over Kassel. His Lancaster was intercepted at 19 feet by a Messerschmitt Bf 110 night fighter. The German radar had guided the fighter to within 200 yards before Martin's crew even knew they were being hunted. The Lancaster exploded. No survivors. Martin was one of 38 men lost that night. Jerry heard the news at 6 a.m. preparing breakfast. He walked outside into the cold Norfolk dawn and wept. That evening, sitting alone in the kitchen, Jerry was wrapping sandwiches in aluminum foil when the wireless started crackling again. He stopped, stared at the foil in his hands, then at the wireless. He unwrapped a sandwich, held the foil sheet near the wireless. The static roared. He thought about Martin, about radar, about German fighters arriving at exactly the right moment, guided by invisible beams. What if it wasn't just the wireless? What if radar worked the same way? It was a stupid thought. Jerry knew that. He was a cook, not a scientist. He'd barely finished secondary school, but he couldn't let it go. If aluminum foil, thin, cheap, kitchen foil, could confuse a civilian radio, could it confuse military radar? The next morning, Jerry did something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He went directly to the station commander's office and asked to speak to the commanding officer. The secretary laughed at him, a Corporal Cook wanting to talk about radar. But Jerry insisted. He wrote a note. "I have information about defeating German radar systems." 20 minutes later, he was standing in front of Wing Commander Arthur Pemberton. Pemberton listened to Jerry's idea with a poker face. When Jerry finished, the Wing Commander leaned back in his chair and said, "Son, are you telling me that kitchen foil can defeat a Würzburg radar station that cost the Germans 500,000 Reichsmarks?" "I don't know, sir," Jerry said, "but it buggers up my wireless something terrible." Pemberton could have dismissed him, should have dismissed him, but something about the desperate logic appealed to him. He picked up the phone and called the telecommunications research establishment at Malvern. "I have a cook here with a theory about radar countermeasures," he said. "Yes, I'm serious. Can you send someone?" 3 days later, Dr. Joan Curran arrived at RAF Marham. She was 28 years old, a physicist from Swansea, one of the few women scientists working on radar countermeasures. She brought testing equipment. Jerry showed her his wireless experiment. She watched the interference, made calculations, and said 2 words, "Show me." They went to the Nissen hut where radar operators trained. Jerry brought a roll of kitchen foil. Dr. Curran asked the operators to track a training signal. Then she had Jerry cut strips of foil, exactly 27 centimeters long, matching the wavelength of the Würzburg radar. They scattered the strips in front of the training radar. The screen went white with false echoes, hundreds of them, like snowflakes on glass. One operator said, "Jesus Christ, it thinks there's 1,000 planes out there." Dr. Curran looked at Jerry. "Corporal, you might have just changed the war." But there was a problem, a massive problem. The concept worked, but the military bureaucracy was terrified of it. If the RAF started dropping aluminum strips to confuse German radar, the Germans would immediately copy the technique and use it against British radar defending the homeland. It was mutually assured blindness. For 6 months, the idea, now codenamed Window, sat in a locked file while men died in the skies over Germany. Jerry returned to his kitchen. The loss rate climbed. In May 1943, 41 bombers were lost over Dortmund. In June, 34 over Cologne. Every morning, Jerry prepared breakfast for fewer men. Then the decision came down. July 1943. The Allied invasion of Sicily was underway. The Luftwaffe was stretched thin. If the Germans developed their own countermeasure, they wouldn't have enough fighters or radar stations to make it effective. It was now or never. Operation Gomorrah, the destruction of Hamburg, the first combat use of Window, July 24, 1943. 791 bombers, each one loaded with 2 Zauersager bundles of aluminum strips, 12 million strips in total, weighing 40 tons. The strips were precisely cut, 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide, 0.02 millimeters thick. Every bundle contained 200 strips. The crews were ordered to throw 1 bundle out the flare chute every minute, starting 80 miles from the target. David Walsh, our flight lieutenant from the opening, was in Lancaster JJIG of 207 Squadron. He was the navigator, sitting in the nose with the best view. At 11:35 p.m., as they crossed the German coast, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Begin window!" The mid-upper gunner grabbed the first bundle from a box beside his position, pulled the release cord, and tossed it down the chute. The aluminum strips scattered into the slipstream, each one tumbling and spinning, each one creating a radar return identical to a bomber. Walsh watched through the perspex as the night filled with glittering confetti, lit by searchlights. Millions of strips, falling slowly, creating a cloud of false targets 200 miles long and 20 miles wide. On the ground, at Luftwaffe radar station Tiger 4 near Hamburg, Obergefreiter Klaus Hoffmann watched his screen with growing horror. At 11:38 p.m., his Würzburg radar was tracking individual bombers perfectly. By 11:42 p.m., his screen showed 10 Saarland targets, then 15 Zero. The plots overlapped, merged, became meaningless. He called his supervisor. "Herr Hauptmann, the radar has failed. Complete whiteout. I cannot distinguish individual aircraft." His supervisor looked at the screen, looked at the sky where they could hear the drone of engines and said, "It hasn't failed. They've defeated it." Across the Hamburg defense system, every radar station reported the same thing: total blindness. The Himmelbett system, which had guided German night fighters to within 200 yards of their targets for 2 years, was useless. The fighter controllers scrambled their Bf-110s and Ju-88s, but without radar guidance, they were hunting bombers in 50 Vorozeren cubic miles of darkness by sound and luck alone. Walsh's Lancaster flew straight to Hamburg, bombed the target, and flew home without seeing a single night fighter. Of the 791 bombers, only 12 were lost, a 15% loss rate. Based on previous Hamburg raids, they had expected to lose 60 to 70 aircraft. Window had saved 48 to 58 bombers in a single night, approximately 336 to 406 men. But Walsh wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about the faces he'd seen at breakfast that morning, the empty chairs at the briefing, all the men who'd died before this night, before someone figured out that kitchen foil could save their lives. The German reaction was panic. General Major Josef Kammhuber, commander of the night fighter forces, was summoned to Berlin. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, demanded an immediate solution. "How did the British do this?" Göring shouted. "How did we not anticipate this?" German scientists examined the strips that landed across Hamburg. They recognized the concept immediately. German researchers had actually proposed the same idea in 1942 and called it Düppel. But the Luftwaffe had rejected it for the same reason the RAF had delayed it: fear that the enemy would copy it. Now the British had used it first, and Germany was 6 months behind in developing countermeasures. The Luftwaffe tried everything. They modified their radars to filter out slow-moving targets. They trained night fighter crews to hunt visually. They positioned fighters along the bomber's route and hoped for random interceptions. None of it worked well. The loss rate for RAF bombers dropped dramatically. For the next 6 months, Window was the decisive advantage in the night sky over Europe. Between July 1943 and January 1944, RAF Bomber Command flew 23 E-00 sorties over Germany. Based on the pre-Window loss rate of approximately 2%, they should have lost 966 bombers. The actual loss was 412 bombers, a 7% loss rate accounting for other tactical changes and German adaptations. The difference, 554 bombers saved. With an average crew of 7 men per bomber, that's 878 lives. But this counts only direct losses. The psychological effect was enormous. Crews flew with more confidence, completed more missions, and made fewer errors caused by fear. Conservative estimates suggest Window was a contributing factor in saving 847 bombers during this critical 6-month period. You'd think Corporal Jerry Stevenson would have been decorated for this. You'd be wrong. Dr. Joan Curran and her husband, Dr. Samuel Curran, received official credit for developing Window. Their contribution was genuine. They turned a kitchen observation into a practical countermeasure system. They calculated wavelengths, designed cutting machinery, and solved the production challenges. But Jerry's name appeared nowhere in the official reports. He was a cook. Cooks don't develop radar countermeasures. Wing Commander Pemberton tried. He submitted a commendation recommending Jerry for a British Empire Medal for initiative leading to the development of electronic countermeasures. The commendation was denied. The official reason: the Window project was classified. Public recognition of Corporal Stevenson's role would compromise operational security. By the time Window was declassified in 1946, nobody cared about the cook who noticed his wireless crackling. Jerry served until 1945. After demobilization, he returned to Durham and opened a small radio repair shop on Elvet Bridge. He married Alice Thornton, a nurse he'd met during the war. They had 3 children. He never spoke about Window even to his family. When customers brought in wireless sets with interference, he'd smile and say, "Sometimes the simplest things cause the biggest problems." In 1962, a military historian named Anthony Firth was researching the development of Window for an official history. He found Pemberton's commendation in an archive. Firth tracked down Jerry and visited his shop. He asked about the story. Jerry confirmed it, shrugged, and said, "I was just a cook who listened to the wireless. Dr. Curran did the real work." first published his findings in a technical journal in 1964. 3 people read it. None of them were journalists. Jerry died on March 8, 1981, at the age of 61 from lung cancer. His obituary in the Durham County Advertiser read, "Gerald Stevenson, radio repair proprietor, survived by wife and 3 children." The obituary mentioned his RAF service in a single sentence. Mr. Stevenson served as a cook with the Royal Air Force during World War II. There is no memorial to Jerry Stevenson, no plaque at RAF Murham, no mention in the RAF Museum in London. If you visit the Telecommunications Research Establishment exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester, you'll find a display about Window. Dr. Joan Curran's photo is there, along with her calculations. There's a sample of the aluminum strips. There's a Würzburg radar operator's account of the confusion on the night of July 24, 1943. There is no mention of a cook who noticed his wireless crackling. But here's what you should know. In the spring of 1943, when Jerry was still peeling potatoes and wrapping sandwiches, he started a ritual. Every morning, before breakfast service, he would write a name on a slip of paper, the name of someone who'd been shot down the previous night. He'd fold the paper and put it in his pocket. At the end of his shift, he'd take out the slip, read the name once, and burn it in the kitchen stove. It was his way of remembering, of carrying them. After Window went operational, the slips of paper became less frequent, then rare. By September 1943, some mornings there were no names to write at all. Jerry kept a small cardboard box of those burned paper ashes in his shop in Durham, on a shelf behind the counter. When he died, Alice found the box. She didn't understand what it was. She threw it away. But the numbers don't lie. Conservative estimate. 847 bombers saved in 6 months. 12,929 men who came home because a cook noticed static on a wireless and had the courage to sound stupid. Men who became fathers, teachers, engineers, shopkeepers. Men who built post-war Britain. Men whose children and grandchildren are alive today because of aluminum foil cut to 27 centimeters. David Walsh, our flight lieutenant from the opening, survived the war. He flew 31 missions, including 7 to Berlin. He became a school teacher in Surrey and taught history. He died in 2003 at the age of 82. Before he died, he gave an interview to the Imperial War Museum. The interviewer asked him which innovation saved the most lives during the war. Walsh didn't hesitate. "Window," he said. "Aluminum strips. Simplest thing in the world. Some genius figured out that if you threw enough tinfoil in the air, you could make their radar useless." I wish I could thank him. I wish I knew his name. Nobody told him. Nobody told him it was a cook from Durham who just wanted his mate's wireless shop to exist. If this story moved you, if you think men like Jerry Stevenson deserve to be remembered, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling these stories. And here's what I really want to know. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever had a simple idea that nobody took seriously? Have you ever noticed something small that turned out to be important? Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you served, or if your family did. These stories connect us across generations and continents, and your engagement keeps them alive. Thank you for keeping the memory alive. Thank you for making sure that a cook from Durham is finally remembered for the 12,929 men he saved. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't tell the whole story either. Behind every statistic was a name. Behind every saved bomber was a crew of 7 men who went home that night instead of dying at 18,000 feet over Germany. And behind the official silence about Jerry Stevenson was a bureaucratic machine that couldn't admit a cook had changed the war. What happened next reveals something darker about military recognition, something about how innovation actually spreads in wartime, and something about the price Jerry paid for noticing what nobody else saw. Flight Sergeant Thomas Blackwood was a mid-upper gunner on Lancaster W. William of 101 Squadron. He was 20 years old from Edinburgh, and he had survived exactly 1 mission when Window became operational. That first mission over Essen on July 3, 1943, had been a nightmare. His Lancaster had been coned by searchlights for 8 minutes, 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours, while flak burst around them and a Bf-110 stalked them through the darkness. They'd survived by diving from 19,000 feet to 8,000 feet, pulling out so hard that Blackwood blacked out. The pilot had vomited into his oxygen mask. They'd lost an engine and barely made it home. Blackwood had written his will the next morning. He was certain he wouldn't survive a second mission. Then came Hamburg, July 24th, 1943. The briefing officer told them about Window, about aluminum strips, about how the Germans would be blind. Blackwood didn't believe it. It sounded like propaganda, like something they told you to keep morale up before sending you to die. But at 11:42 p.m., as W. William crossed the German coast, Blackwood began throwing bundles of strips down the flare chute. One bundle every minute, just as ordered. He watched them tumble into the night, catching the moonlight, creating a river of silver behind the bomber stream. And nothing happened. No searchlights, no flak, no fighters. They flew to Hamburg, dropped their bombs, and flew home in darkness so complete it felt like they were alone in the sky. Not a single burst of flak, not a single searchlight beam. When they landed at Ludford Magna at 3:47 a.m., Blackwood climbed out of the turret and his legs gave out. He sat on the tarmac and wept. "We didn't fire a single round," he told the intelligence officer during debriefing. 7 hours over Germany, and I never saw an enemy aircraft, not one. The intelligence officer made a note. "Window is effective," he wrote. Then he looked at Blackwood and said something the gunner would never forget. "Son, somebody just gave you your life back. You were dead. Now you're not. Remember that." Blackwood flew 27 more missions. He survived the war. He became a carpenter in Edinburgh and built houses. He died in 1998 at the age of 75, surrounded by his 6 grandchildren. Before he died, he told them a story about aluminum foil and a miracle over Hamburg. "Somebody figured it out," he said. "Somebody saved us. I never learned who." Blackwood was one of 12. 929 men who owed their lives to Jerry Stephenson, but the number was actually higher because Window didn't just save the men who flew with it, it changed how those men flew afterward. Squadron leader James "Jimmy" Roth was a pilot with 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, and he flew his first post-Window mission on August 17, 1943, against the Peenemünde V2 rocket research facility. Before Window, Roth had developed a coping mechanism for fear. He simply accepted that he was already dead. Every mission was borrowed time. He flew with the fatalism of a condemned man, taking unnecessary risks because nothing mattered anyway. But after Hamburg, after seeing the loss rate drop, something shifted. Roth started believing he might actually survive, and that belief made him more careful, more precise, more tactical. He started flying like someone who had a future. His crew noticed immediately. "Skipper's flying like he wants to live," his navigator said. "About bloody time." The effect rippled across Bomber Command. Crews who'd been flying with reckless desperation began flying with calculated caution. They took evasive action instead of flying straight. They varied their altitudes and routes instead of following the bomber stream blindly. Morale improved. Completion rates improved. The number of aircraft damaged but making it home increased. In September 1943, a statistical analyst at High Wycombe named Peter Chambers noticed something peculiar in the data. Not only were fewer aircraft being lost, but fewer aircraft were returning with battle damage. The Germans weren't just missing more often, they were getting fewer shots altogether. Chambers wrote a report. Window has created a secondary survival effect by increasing crew confidence and improving tactical flying. His report was classified. Nobody outside of High Wycombe Command saw it. Certainly not Jerry Stephenson. But the Germans saw the effect. They just interpreted it differently. Oberleutnant Werner Barker was a night fighter pilot with Nachtjagdgeschwader 1, based at Venlo in Holland. He was 24 years old, a veteran of 31 confirmed victories, and on the night of July 24, 1943, his war changed forever. He'd been vectored toward the Hamburg bomber stream by ground control, flying his Bf-110 at 20,000 feet, waiting for the familiar voice in his headset, "Victor, Victor, Bandit at your 10 o'clock, 1000 meters, altitude 5,700. The voice never came. Instead, his controller said, "All aircraft, free hunt. Radar ineffective. Repeat, radar ineffective." Barke was hunting blind. He could hear the bombers, hundreds of them, a sound like distant thunder. But in the darkness, without radar guidance, he never saw a single aircraft. He flew for 2 hours, burning fuel, seeing nothing but empty sky. He landed at Venlo at 2:15 a.m., furious and humiliated. In the debriefing room, Barke and 11 other pilots sat in stunned silence. Their commander, Major Hans-Joachim Jabs, addressed them with barely controlled rage. "The British have neutralized our radar. Every station from Holland to Berlin reported the same interference. Until we develop a countermeasure, you will hunt by sight, by sound, by intuition. You will patrol the known routes. You will hope for luck." Hope for luck. The Luftwaffe night fighter force, which had been a precision instrument of targeted destruction, was now reduced to hope. Over the next month, Barke flew 16 missions. He achieved 0 victories. In August 1943, he shot down 1 bomber, a straggler limping home alone, separated from the mainstream. In September, 2 more. His kill rate had dropped by 85%. Across the entire night fighter force, victory claims fell from an average of 4. 7% of the bomber stream to 1, 9%. Luftwaffe pilots who'd been aces became irrelevant overnight. Barke survived the war. He was shot down over Belgium in March 1945 and spent 2 months as a POW. After the war, he worked as a mechanical engineer in Hamburg, the city he'd failed to defend on that July night in 1943. In 1967, he was interviewed by a British aviation historian researching German night fighter tactics. The historian asked him which Allied innovation had been most effective. "Window," Beck said immediately. "Your aluminum strips, we called it Doppel. It destroyed our entire defensive system in one night. We had the best radar in the world, the best night fighters, the best pilots. Then you threw tinfoil at us and we were useless." The historian asked, "Do you know who developed it?" "British scientists," Buck said. "That's what we were told. Some brilliant team at your research establishment." The historian didn't correct him. He didn't know about Jerry Stevenson either. But while the British kept Jerry's name secret, the Germans made their own tragic mistake with Doppel, one that cost them 6 critical months. In April 1942, 15 months before the British used Window, a German physicist named Dr. Hans Carl von Willissen had proposed the identical concept to the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the Air Ministry. He'd calculated the radar cross-section of aluminum strips, demonstrated how they would create false echoes, and suggested mass production. His report was titled Radar Countermeasure Proposal, Metallized Strip Dispersion. The report reached General Oberst Ernst Udet, Director of Air Armament. Udet read it, understood the implications, and immediately suppressed it. His reasoning was identical to the British concern. If Germany used Doppel, Britain would copy it and use it against German radar defending the Reich. The defensive radar network protecting German cities was more valuable than any offensive advantage over Britain. Udet ordered all copies of von Willissen's report classified and destroyed. He personally visited von Willissen and told him, "Your idea is brilliant. That's why we can never use it. Forget you ever thought of it. That's an order." Von Willissen obeyed. The report was filed in a vault. 15 months later, when the British dropped Window over Hamburg, German scientists opened that vault and found von Willissen's calculations gathering dust. They'd already had the solution. They'd deliberately ignored it. And now they were 6 months behind in developing countermeasures. Hermann Göring, when informed of this, reportedly threw a telephone at the aide who told him, "We had it first," he screamed. "We had it first and we were too frightened to use it." The irony was savage. Both sides had independently developed the same countermeasure. Both sides had suppressed it for the same reason. But the British had blinked first, had accepted the risk, had deployed Window in July 1943, and that 6-month head start changed the balance of the air war. By January 1944, the Germans had deployed improved radars with better filtering, had trained night fighter crews in new tactics, and had partially neutralized Window's effectiveness. But the damage was done. The 6 months of relative safety had allowed the RAF to build up strength, train more crews, and survive attrition that would have crippled the bomber offensive. The Americans, flying daylight raids, quickly adopted their own version of window, called chaff, and used it to devastating effect during the Big Week Offensive in February 1944. Dr. von Willison, the German physicist who'd first proposed Duppel, was reassigned to a radar research facility in Bavaria. He continued working on countermeasures throughout 1944. In April 1945, as Allied forces approached, von Willison burned his research papers and walked into the mountains. He was never seen again. Some reports suggest he committed suicide. Others suggest he disappeared into Austria. His family never learned what happened to him. In 1953, a British radar historian named Derek Howes was researching German wartime technology. He discovered von Willison's original 1942 report in captured documents. Howes published his findings in a technical journal, noting the parallel development of window and Duppel. His article included a footnote. It remains one of history's ironies that both sides developed identical countermeasures and both sides initially suppressed them. The British courage to deploy first gave them a decisive 6-month advantage. Howes's article mentioned Dr. Joan Curran as the British developer. It did not mention Jerry Stephenson, but courage is a strange word for what actually happened, because the decision to deploy window wasn't made by scientists or tacticians. It was made by politicians who decided that the risk was acceptable because the war situation was desperate enough. And nobody asked the cook who'd first noticed the interference whether he thought his idea was worth the risk. Jerry learned about von Willison's report in 1963 when Anthony Firth, the historian researching window, showed him Howes's article. Jerry read it slowly, sitting in his repair shop in Durham, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "The Germans had it first," he said quietly. "We all could have had it in 1942. Would that have changed anything?" Firth asked. Jerry thought about Martin Hughes, about the 1047 bombers lost between June 1942 and January 1943, about all the names he'd written on slips of paper and burned in his kitchen stove. "Yes," Jerry said, "it would have changed everything." He handed the article back to Firth. "But we can't know, can we? We can only know what happened. And what happened is a lot of men came home who shouldn't have. That's all that matters." Firth looked at him. "Don't you want recognition? Don't you want people to know what you did?" Jerry shook his head. "I noticed something. Dr. Curran understood it. The RAF used it. The men came home. That's the story. My name doesn't need to be in it." But here's what Jerry never said. Never told anyone, not even Alice. He kept a list. A private list hidden in the back of his workshop of every crew he knew personally who flew after July 24, 1943. Men who'd eaten his breakfasts, who'd shaken his hand, who'd promised to visit his radio shop after the war. He tracked their missions through station records he quietly copied. He counted how many missions they survived that, statistically, should have ended them. 37 names on that list. Men like Thomas Blackwood, James Roth, David Walsh. Men who came home, who married, who had children, who lived ordinary lives. Jerry calculated that those 37 men collectively flew 614 missions after Window became operational. Based on the pre-Window loss rate, 26 of them should have died. All 37 survived. 26 men who should have died but didn't. 26 men who existed because of kitchen foil and a wireless crackling with static. Jerry kept that list in a tobacco tin behind the shortwave radio parts on his highest shelf. After he died, Alice found it while cleaning out the shop. She saw the names, the mission tallies, the survival calculations. She didn't understand what it meant. She kept the tin. It's still in a closet somewhere in Durham, in a house owned by Jerry's daughter, Margaret, who never knew her father saved 929 men. The tin contains 37 names, 37 miracles, 37 ordinary men who lived ordinary lives because a cook noticed the extraordinary. And that's the real story of Window. Not the statistics, not the loss rates, not the classified reports or the technical journals. The story is 37 names in a tobacco tin, kept secret by a man who understood that some things matter more than recognition. If you think stories like this, stories about the real cost of innovation, about the men behind the statistics, about recognition denied and memory preserved in tobacco tins, deserve to be told, subscribe to this channel. We dig deeper than the official histories, we find the names nobody remembered, and we make sure people like Jerry Stevenson are finally given their place in history. Drop a comment and tell us, do you know someone whose contribution was never recognized? Someone who changed everything and nobody knew? We want to hear those stories. Share them below.